Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Fiddler's Green podcast. I am your host, David Green, and of course, I think this is the first podcast I've had in quite some time because of the Sildings conference. I should announce that I am doing another conference in basically Oxford at the end of August. And so since then, my content's been a little bit sporadic since most of my time has been spent writing these conference speeches. And so here I am. Tonight's podcast is obviously really, really late. Again, it's sort of driven by family life. My son's going to bed later and later and later. So my ability to stream at reasonable times is kind of being a little bit impacted. And also is my ability to prepare properly for these streams. So there might be a little bit less of a monologue this time. But, you know, it is what it is. We'll talk about what's going on in the news and what's happening. I know that a lot of people I think this is sort of a low news month in August. Everyone's kind of preparing to go on vacation. Obviously, I myself have been in and out of town all day or all the last 2 weeks. So there's probably not a lot of stuff to discuss in the news. I've been active on Twitter, but everyone's talking about like relationships and whether you want a trad wife or not, or whether the actress from Barbie is actually hot. That was a big subject on Twitter. And of course, there's this dynamic that always plays out with this stuff on Twitter, especially over actresses that are hot or not. And it's the same argument every single time. I wonder if people do this, is that men are under the impression, I think rightfully so, that for the last 10 years, actresses have been noticeably less stunning. Now, part of this is subjective taste, obviously. I don't really typically like how actresses look. I think they look too standardized. They look too plastic surgery. I shouldn't be talking about the attractiveness of any women who aren't my wife, but this is kind of a hot topic on Twitter right now because no one has anything else to talk about, so we're doing this. But there is a Hollywood look, there is a Hollywood glamour, and since Me Too in particular, not only have the scripts suffered, but people have been complaining that there have been fewer young actresses, and the young actresses that are there are noticeably less good looking. And so there's all this discussion, and it's always the same discussion, like I said. Twitter is the same discussion replayed again and again and again. It never changes. It never advances. You just have to... I mean, in many ways, that's why I do these podcasts. I do these podcasts to solidify conversations and to make sure that I can kind of get to the bottom of them. But in case you were wondering about this controversy over whether such and such an actress is hot or not. So the one was Margot Robbie, who is the actress from the Barbie movie, who, according to the review from Peachy Keenan, was a horribly paused movie. So I guess, she had a better time in Oppenheimer or whatever the alternative movies are in the theaters this week. I wouldn't know. But Margot Robbie played Barbie, and, I don't know what the requirements are for playing Barbie. Presumably it's just being blonde, because Barbie, the doll, is this is literally a plastic printout. There's no personality in the face whatsoever. But the controversy was whether Margot Robbie is hot enough to be Barbie. It's a stupid thing, but you notice this dynamic that appears is that women take it personally, first of all. Now, okay, if this person isn't hot, then who in the world is? And the second thing is that the female side of Twitter, I've noticed this a lot. They have a hard time distinguishing between hot or beautiful and famous. Somehow, as long as somebody is famous, it doesn't matter how objectively attractive they are or not. They immediately, in the average woman's expectations, they immediately shoot to the top of the attractiveness scale. A good example of this was Zendaya, or whatever that actress is, who's not very attractive, but since she was cast in Spider-Man and in Dune and in a lot of other leading roles, all these people think that she's just a bombshell, when really she's a very average-looking woman. And if this phenomenon wasn't illustrated enough in sort of the modern internet sphere, you have the likes of Lizzo and just objectively unattractive people now being hailed by the majority of young women as just paragons of attractiveness. And you have sort of this, this crazy, I don't know what this clown world doublespeak where we have to pretend ugly is beautiful and beautiful is ugly. I don't know. For my own money, I'm kind of trying to sidestep these discussions. But I wonder why people keep on having this. I wonder why people keep on revisiting these conversations over and over again. Anyway, I should get on to the quasi talk, because with such a little time to prepare for this, I didn't really have that much to say. But I will say, I have been working on several video essays ahead of the ones that I'm doing for the conference. People asked me to do the 20 rules for friends that I did as a Twitter thread a while ago, and I'm doing that for the Substack, and it'll also be a video as well. This is something that I've been trying to do more and more, is instead of doing Twitter threads, doing small Substack posts, potentially with an accompanying video. I think that's a more productive use of time. All the stuff that we do these days, it's very hard to know how to use social media at this day and age. And this is part of my conversation right now, is everyone knows that people are sick of the ordinary dynamics that play out. Everyone knows that this is... no one's really getting anything from this. I mean, we'll get a little bit. No, I hope that I provide people value for their time watching this stream. That's one of the objectives here. I don't want to be blathering about nothing. Although I did spend about 10 minutes talking about the whole our actresses getting noticeably less hot over time, which is, just the apex of superfluous conversations on Twitter. But That being said, I think a lot of people are having a hard time understanding how to use social media. And this is not something we've been struggling with. I mean, we've been struggling with this really since 2019. People don't remember this, and I talk about this a lot, but back in the day, in 2015, 2016, and 2017, the game was so easy. It was just about putting your opinion out there and getting into conversations. And all it took is for someone to be wrong on the internet, and you could call them out, or you can get into a dialectic or a conversation, and you could bring people over to your side, and people would be listening to you who were not necessarily on your side already. And more than that, the platforms were more or less open. This is before, obviously, the 2016 election. This is before Becca Lewis's alternative influencers diagram that kicked off the wave of cascading censorship. This is before the COVID pandemic and the takeover of mindless breadtube grifters that now basically consume the entire political sphere. And since then, the political sides have been totally just locked in amber. But there was a genuine sense that people were up for grabs, and people were listening. Right now, there isn't. Right now, what we have is Twitter, which is potentially a dying platform. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the conversation. Twitter, and even that's hard, what is Twitter for, right? Twitter is an addictive drug that kills your brain. Everyone knows it. I know it. I use it at my own risk. I don't like it. And it's also the most powerful social media platform out there. The other thing we have is we have various platforms for video sharing and essay writing, such as Substack and YouTube and Odyssey. And this comprises the majority of the long-form content. And I should say that there's been a lot of great stuff that has come out in long form content. The essay quality that we've gotten from people like Endeavor and Morgoth and just numerous Substackers on, if you read Martyr or Paul Kingsnorth, or again, I could just go off the list. Alex Kashuda has a wonderful podcast on Substack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The quality of these long form pieces is incredibly high. But the thing is they're playing inside a subculture. They're playing inside a culture that's already established. They're being read by the same people. They're enhancing our lives. They're making us enlightened about the rest of the world. But they don't reach outside. They don't actually puncture the veil and actually lead to the change of anything. Everything at this point seems to be kind of locked in. Now, there was a podcast I saw, and everyone should watch this. It's a horrible podcast, but I really enjoyed it. It's by, I think this guy is more or less a news substacker, Astral Flight Simulation. And, he and I have had back and forth on Twitter, and some of his interviews I haven't liked so much. But his one with Amy Therese is just truly delicious, because Amy Therese is just... and one of the controversies I got into this week was what kind of woman are you looking for? And I made the case. There was this conversation about why some conservative men date liberal women, and my case was you really don't want a hyper political woman. For instance, agreeableness is a good quality and a mate for most men, unless you're really adventurous as a man, and that's fine. Going after the wild mares and taming them. If you're the wild mare whisperer, if you're the horse whisperer, then it's that's perfectly fine. That if you want the women who are wild spirits, but agreeableness generally is a good quality for most men in wife material. And in this day and age, most agreeable women naturally coalesce around things like liberalism and feminism and Democratic Party politics. They go with the flow. So it's naturally going to be the case that men are going to end up with women who are a little bit more liberal than they are in their outward politics. Now, in a healthy relationship, women's politics are naturally going to move towards your own. You are, in this dimension, not in all dimensions, sort of the rock of the relationship. And so she's following your lead in this complementary dance that we're doing. But that being said, superficial liberal politics shouldn't be an impediment to you pursuing a woman, especially if you have the right sense of her. And conversely, at the same time, I said, guys, you really don't want to be dating a Murdoch Chan. So I don't know. This is sort of a deep cut from 2017, but there was in 2017 to 2019 roundabouts. There was this deplorable alt-right comedy show cartoon called Murdoch Murdoch. For those of you uninitiated, horribly racist. I do not endorse anything said on that show, but boy did it have some funny moments. Largely by subverting audiences' expectations, having Nazi characters that made fun of themselves, coming into horribly racist situations, and then finding a way to be even more racist about it. Which is, of course, the core of comedy, and one of the reasons why we can't do comedy anymore properly is we have no ability to play with boundaries. The government, the reigning religion is way too weak. It's way too self-conscious of itself. It does not have the internal strength to go on, and it's hyper paranoid about anyone making jokes about anything. And so it was refreshing in 2017 to 2019 to see this completely irreverent and morally deplorable cartoon that I hated myself for laughing at, but I still laughed at it. I had to go to confession afterwards. But one of the gags on this show was a character all the characters are called variations of Murdoch. I think this is unintentional. The channel was named Murdoch Murdoch because of an accident, and they all named the characters Murdoch something. So Murdoch Chan was sort of, there was a straight man and there's a silly guy. And then there's a female character, and you expect the female character in most modern comedy to be the centering force, because this is the era of the girl boss. This is the era of women are wonderful. So you expect, this is the female character who's kind of hot. She's going to be the stabilizing force of this trio. She's going to be the voice of reason. And this is one of the funny reasons is Murdoch Chan is this most horrifically racist neo-Nazi you could possibly imagine. I mean, take the Blues Brothers neo-Nazis and then just jam that thing up to 11 on the Spinal Tap scale, and you get Murdoch Chan. And so her role in the thing is to always come in and say the even more horrifically racist thing than the rest of the characters are saying, and kind of completely subvert expectations from that dimension. And of course, because this is the internet and no one has any experiences with real women, people develop this crush on this fictional anime character. This is another function of millennial and Zoomer men too, developing crushes on animated characters. I mean, it's literally a Wojak, and people developed crushes on Murdoch Chan. The joke being that if this woman was real, no sane man would touch her with a 20-foot pole. Women, there are such things as women who have healthy political point of views, and there are such things as women who have healthily aggressive political views. I mean, for instance, one of my mutuals on Twitter, a woman who I genuinely enjoy reading, is Peachy Keenan, who's delightfully aggressive, but in a very feminine and healthy way that's still kind of still has kind of mom vibes along with the twist of lemon, right? There's a boundary to this, and one of the funny things in Murdoch Murdoch is the fact that they cross this boundary. And so you do not want a woman who has aggressive political tendencies that are psychotic or vindictive or hyper aggressive. These are emotions that men experience in a healthy way. Men know how it is to go through a political interaction and physically feel anger. And use gamer words in a way that's probably very inadvisable in any professional situation, and sometimes say those words, and sometimes be hyper aggressive, and then have to walk it back, right? Healthy women don't experience this level of anger and vindictiveness in the ordinary operating procedures of their psychology. A woman who's expressing opinions like Murdoch Chan in Murdoch Murdoch is having deep psychological issues, right? If they're sincere, right? And so it's always kind of like you always need to be very, very careful of women who are very, very aggressive on the political front, in my opinion. And some women do this as an endearing way, like as an endearing kind of joke, especially younger women, and that can be fine too. However, I will make one exception for a delightful vlogger named Amy Therese, who went on the Astral Flight Simulation podcast and just had an unfiltered opinion on sort of the state of the left wing generally, which is that I think she's an ex-Marxist. I think she's still a Marxist, but she's now a right-wing Marxist through and through. She's done with the left, and she has absolutely no time for them. And it's this. The podcast is this torrent of inconvenient truths with more F-bombs than, and not the one that I can get away with saying on YouTube either without getting my channel demonetized, about the nature of the left and left-wing men in particular. But one thing that I kind of took to heart in all of this, the host, I don't know what the guy's name is. He's Astral Flight Simulation. That's the Substack he writes under. He asked her, like, well, you just have no fear. You're not looking to build any bridges. And Amy Therese is like, no, I don't care, because dialectic is over. If you're spending your time talking to the left, you're wasting your time and you're wasting your viewers' time, and you might as well just paint the entire thing with a black brush, jump off the ledge and scream your curses up to the heavens for what it's worth. It's cathartic. It's honest. It's vital in a certain way. And I listened to this podcast after, writing an essay. It didn't take me a lot of time. It wasn't a thoughtful essay, but I was writing this essay as sort of a capstone, a retrospective to my debate with Professor Matt McManus. And instead of doing a tweet thread, I decided to just write out the tweet thread in an essay form. And it took me not that long. And it was an experiment with how quickly I could get a video out. I used to get videos out, boom, like quick takes back in the day, back in the era of 2018, where it was all about response videos, when there was an active dialect that you're participating in, and that actually was like a back and forth with people who wanted to be convinced. And so I just did it. What if I just made a video like I did back in 2017? Boom, there it is. But of course, it's totally useless. Matt McManus doesn't take politics seriously. He's a troll. He's a troll with a PhD. The answers he gave me in our discussion were unserious. No one could possibly take them seriously. They're the answers he has to give to stay employed and to make sure that he has a career. And in the meantime, we're just treading water. And he has to talk to me because he was temporarily embarrassed into talking to me. But there's no dialectic here. And furthermore, is there anybody who listens to him who's genuinely interested in what a thoughtful right-winger has to say? I'm roughly aware that there are like a few left-wingers who watch my channel. Reality Weasel is one of those people. He made a video a few years ago that I said I'd respond to, and then I went to a conference and I lost the time to do it. And now the video is years in the past and it's not worth it. And there's one other person who watches this channel that's broadly on the left, but more often than not, the left-wingers that I have who watch my channel are of the Amy Therese variety, where they read Karl Marx and they like Karl Marx's economic theory, which kind of escapes me as sort of a scientist and a sort of like an evaluator of descriptive reality. I've read Das Kapital Volume 1. It is what it is. It's a fine book. It's also 100% reliant on the principle of labor theory of value. And Marx just tried to save this, saying like, well, did you know Adam Smith is also assumes labor theory of value? Yeah, right. But, there was this thing called the 20th century where libertarians saw that the labor theory of value was not true and updated their theories, and Marxists just doubled down on labor theory of value, like Lysenkoism. And so it's hard to see what remains of Marxist economic theory once labor theory of value is destroyed as a premise. I reread it a few years ago, and I didn't go with a fine-tooth comb, but I would really be interested in what people are actually getting out of this book. If you were to assume like every proposition that relies on labor theory of value as a predicate can just be inked out in black, the book would be mostly lines that were inked out in black. There are very few statements that don't depend on this. And so I don't know, but Amy Therese might be a Marxist. She might believe in Marxist economics, but she's not meaningfully left-wing in any given way. Now, I realize when I say F-bomb that there are literally two F slurs that you can use on the internet. Both of them they're both used by opposite sides, and they both refer to bundles of dried sticks. And one of them is fascist, right? The other one I can't say without getting demonetized, but I'm sure you can imagine what that is. Oh yes, sorry. I also need to add my entropy link. Thank you very much. Iron Duke is good to remind me of that. But here it is. Let me pin it in the channel. But okay, I'm rambling because essentially I don't have a prepared talk. I'm having a little prepared talk, but I'm rambling because I don't have much more to talk about. This entire year has been us discussing the death of discourse online. The problem with me is that discourse is the bread and butter of interesting things to talk about. And then there's still fumes. There are still things that are going on that are interesting, and we can discuss them. But they tend to kind of move in very predictable patterns. Let's see how this works. Okay, so in correspondence with a variety of interesting essays I read on Substack. Let's ignore all the boring stuff having to do with leftists and Matt McManus, who, these people, I'm going to be honest with you guys. Before I get into this, I listened to this, I was interested for briefly last week about, I wonder if I really picked from the bottom of the barrel when I talked to Professor McManus, and what other leftists broadly are speaking about the right. And I discovered this podcast called Know Your Enemy, like the Rage Against the Machine song. And I listened to their conversation on men and their discussion of Josh Hawley's book and the discussion of Manliness. Oh God, who's that by? It's by some Straussian. I'm going to look this up. Harvey Mansfield. That's it. Harvey Mansfield. He was actually an Ivy League. He was an Ivy League Straussian back in the 90s, and he wrote a tome on masculinity then as well. And so these lefty guys are discussing manliness, and of course every single line they speak, I can't listen. This is another reason too. This is another reason why I love the Amy Therese podcast so much, is because she calls out leftist men. They're so effeminate, even if they're not literally gay. They're so effeminate. They're reviewing Josh Hawley's book, which makes reference to the Bible and to the Iliad and to serious motifs that are going throughout philosophy. Josh Hawley's book, he's a politician, and politicians almost never write interesting books. And I certainly haven't read Josh Hawley's book, so I can't besmirch it, but I'm listening to them review Josh Hawley's book on their podcast about manliness, and I'm listening to their description, and I'm thinking, this actually sounds pretty substantive. All of these statements are more or less true. And after every one of their statements about how manliness is born on sacrifice, how manliness is born on risk-taking, and the idea of, thumos, and vitality, and how this traces through things like Machiavelli and Dante, and modern concepts of the warrior spirit, and how this translates to family life. After every one of their statements, the straight guy, not the gay guy, gives this like it's risible. It's risible. It reminds me of that. It reminds me of those movies where the Romans are all are all kind of in togas, not in the vomitorium. I know the vomitorium isn't literally the place where they vomited up their dinners to eat more. The vomitorium is actually the exit from any large building, right? Because it vomits the people out onto the street. But you can imagine like some decadent Roman magistrate sitting on a sofa, gorged out of his mind, looking at the barbarians, going, oh, those poor plebs. And the entire hour and a half conversation was them reading through the statements of the book and just scoffing at them. And at the end, you're like, okay, well, you're scoffing at it. So you're implying that there's some logical problem here. You're implying that there's some logical issue. What's going on? Like, what are these statements wrong? Are they incorrect? And they get to the end of this 1 hour and 20-minute scoff fest at these two people, communicating at all times that they think these people are deplorable, but never contesting the facts. And they get to the end and like, oh, well, what's the leftist solution to men? It's like, well, I guess we don't really have one. And they sit around and they look at each other. Like, there's almost this odd silence that kind of carries over. I mean, there's not actually silence in these podcasts because these people are professional blatherers and they fill it up with scoffing if they don't have any actual sentences to put in the gaps. But there's this awkward moment in the podcast where you can tell they're kind of looking at each other, wondering, okay, so what actually is the message to what ails men in the modern world? What actually does define a man? And then you discover that these guys both like, one of them is gay and the other one doesn't have any children. So they start talking about like their nieces and nephews and how like the women raising them might be able to do a good job. And then they talk about their own concepts of manhood and they inevitably go back to, drum roll, their conservative fathers that they hated. They're rebelling against. And so, and they think, well, yeah, there was a lot of great stuff. There's a lot of noble stuff that we could take from all of these conservative men and we could integrate it with a progressive worldview. And maybe some of my nephews who were growing up, without fathers in the house, maybe they could absorb some of this classical masculinity. Maybe they could learn about it. Maybe we could train somebody to teach it. And then one of the guys says, well, it's kind of weird that, none of them will have one of these role models in the house. And they kind of, there's a wistful moment there. And then the podcast just kind of ends. And that's the substance of left-wing criticism, apparently, of one of the major topics on the right, which is the development of gender roles and masculinity. This is not, I mean, I can't, and someone says I feel dumber just hearing you talk about it. Yeah, I don't feel dumb. I don't feel, is dumber a word? I don't feel more dumb for listening to this podcast because they literally narrate every thesis in Josh Hawley's book along with the arguments, just so they can do a little effeminate laugh. And, oh, how ridiculous. But like, I actually absorbed Josh Hawley's book through listening to this Know Your Enemy podcast. So it's not ridiculous. And it was an amazing study in leftist psychology. I mean, like these men aren't raising men. They don't have traditional relationships, and they recognize this absence. But there's this answer. There's this void, and they come to the void and they look off the edge of the abyss. Okay, that's kind of scary. Let's go back to scoffing at conservatives, guys. Let's go back at scoffing at the troglodytes with the wrong opinions. And no answer is actually given. I mean, there's no way I could watch that podcast and come away with it. If I were a leftist, this is why I'm beginning to think that this is a temperament thing. If I were a leftist and I was listening to this podcast, I would come away from this discussion with a deep sense of existential dread. I would know that this question isn't being answered. Some people are saying that they don't think Hawley is a manly man. Well, I mean, dude, it's all relative, right? I mean, I tell my wife that, could you believe it? Like, I wasn't the most manly man in high school, and I don't know if I've gotten an enormously. I don't think that I've gotten enormously more manly since I was 19. But compared to the mainstay of most men that I encounter every day these days, I feel like Cole the Conqueror or something like that. It's all relative. And relative to these fruits who were doing the Know Your Enemy podcast, Josh Hawley's is freaking like Solomon Kane. Masculinity is a relative thing. Nothing else has taught me that. And I mean, here's where we are. Here's where we are. And I guess my takeaway is just virtually the entirety of the leftist audience who listens to these podcasts is not in the market for any new ideas. They're not actually looking to introspect and they're not even like weighing ideas together. You know, every now and again, like I see an idea that I hate. This is happening to me a lot. Well, this happens to me sometimes when you look to like things like Islam or, you know, for instance, I was at dinner with my good friend Black Horse, who I see in the chat right now. And, you know, we were talking about various problems having to do with each of our, and this is what Christians talk about when we're eating dinner together, is various problems in our churches. And of course, you know, listening to Black Horse describe how sort of the base Protestant churches handled the COVID era, you know, I was experiencing like a certain amount of Protestant envy, right? Like that's not obviously enough for me to abandon the church because I'm not a Catholic, because I think that the leadership structure is awesome. But there was this feeling of saying like, you have an answer to this question that my side does not have an answer to. And that makes me interested, not necessarily with changing my opinion, but with synthesizing my ideas with yours, because I recognize that you have a piece of the puzzle that I do not. This does not occur. For some reason, this part of the brain is broken in leftists. There are multiple times in my conversation with leftists, even though, you know, you could say that I rhetorically stumble or I fail to drive the dagger in a lot of times with conversations with leftists. But there are frequent times in these conversations where it's obvious that not only do they not have the right answer in this moment, like they've been caught flat-footed, there just doesn't exist an answer to this question. A good example of this is the what is a woman question. There was this, you know, obviously everyone knows the Matt Walsh thing. For a solid month, the left wing was humiliated by the demonstrable reality that they could not tell or they could not give. Nobody could give a definition of what a woman was that wasn't completely tautologically self-referential. And the left was, I mean, despite the fact that they used woman all the time in their political messaging. And for a while, the left was completely humiliated about this until at one point, about a month afterwards, there was this conservative pundit who had written a book about wokeism, and she was asked for a definition of wokeism, and she had a brain fart and she couldn't answer it. I think it was like Bethany Mandel or one of the Federalist people, I believe this was. And of course, you know, she was there on Twitter with a better definition an hour later, but by that point the show had been clipped and the show had been clipped and the leftist meme had been created. They didn't seem to realize that there's a difference between these two things. There's a difference between catching somebody out like flat-footed inside like you ask me, okay, I'm somebody who teaches stats, and you ask me what the central limit theorem is, and I go blah 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 blah. I don't have it prepared. It's not coming to mind. And you go, oh wow, oh this guy who supposedly teaches stats doesn't even know what the central limit theorem is, which is the core part of Statistics 101. Great, you know, you caught me off guard, and I had a brain fart. But that's different from saying that as a class, all statistics teachers don't know what the central limit theorem is. That is a broader ideological problem. The problem with what is a woman is not that a single person couldn't give the definition in an interview. It's that nobody can give the definition anywhere. But somehow that part of the leftist imagination is broken. And because of that, dialogue is broken. Well, I'm talking a lot. I haven't started my slides yet. But we can talk about sort of Substack Essays. And, you know, I'm the Substack essays that I thought I would do this for a while, is to highlight certain essays I thought were good. I'm not going to put the links on the screen because I don't have time to do that before these streams. I'm usually rushing in between putting my kid down or handing him off at an appropriate time and starting these streams. There is this one of my favorite channels before I get onto the essays is I Hypocrite. And I think he's gone professional, if I do remember it, but he streams every single day, except for Wednesdays when he's out playing with his kid. And originally he was telling his wife, he's like, oh man, well, I have a Wednesday stream scheduled. And he said to the camera, he said, and then she gave me this look. She gave me this look that said, okay, honey, you can do that, but is that really in your best interest? And wives do this, and I don't know if probably there's like 3 women. There's 3 women who watch this show, and one of them is Juniper Tree, and the other one is my wife. But married women know they do this. They have this look they give you where they say like, is this really in our interest for you to be live streaming when you should be playing with our son outside? Yeah. Guys, always prioritize your family over your live stream, and that's what I Hypocrite did, and now he streams every day other than Wednesdays. So that's a thing. But anyway, on to the Substack essays. The reason why I selected these essays is they kind of illustrate the moment we're in. In the winter, we were in a moment of sort of indeterminacy. There was obviously the AI stuff that was emerging. No one knew exactly what that would portend. I don't think we still know exactly what that would portend, but I think there's sort of a normalization. We're kind of getting a sense at what this means and what this means generally. I still stand by my essay in January. What this means generally with AI is a whole lot of really, really good fakeness. Anything that can be faked will be faked by the AI, but it's hard to kind of translate that into anything more organic. And those barriers seem like they're either not going to be overcome or they're not going to be overcome for a long time. The real thought barriers, that is. And there are also things, I think I listed 3 things back in the day, like the economic question, the Ukraine war question, the election question. And I should have also added in the technology question. But these are all open questions over the winter, and they all kind of been answered. And the answer is that elections are kind of, for the most part, fake and will be going forward. They're all about vote harvesting, which means that it's very, very hard to see how there's going to be any mainstream disruption of the electoral system until some broad coalition realigns itself. The economy and the Ukrainian war really resolved themselves in a similar way, which is everything got worse, but nothing resolved itself. And the prognosis is that everything is going to get worse until people have to kind of come clean about the reality of these circumstances. People have to come clean about the reality of high interest rates on our economy and the fact that we're either going to experience a recession or inflation for the foreseeable future because of the fact that the growth we need to keep this economy afloat is just not happening. Or I should say the real growth, because on paper, line always goes up. Right now, and this is what all the Substack essays have in common, is we're kind of getting an understanding of what the new normal feels like this summer. People were speculating that there could be a huge disruption this summer. This summer was more or less just more of the same. And what was happening is this us kind of understanding what's going on, things kind of fading away. There are 2 essays that Morgoth wrote, and then there's 2 essays that Morgoth wrote and both Morgoth and Endeavor wrote. They both kind of wrote the same essay. The first one was on the competency crisis, as illustrated by the submarine. There is a submarine disaster very ironically, in the Titanic, and it's kind of odd when you think about it, right? Because the original Titanic, it's funny because if you watch movies about the era, if you watch podcasts from the era, or podcasts, no, TV shows like Upstairs, Downstairs, or most recently Downton Abbey, they usually describe, this is of the Edwardian era, they usually describe kind of the apex moment of European civilization. Everyone agrees that the decline of European civilization began in earnest with World War I, but there are certain prefigurations of this. The first one was sort of the precipitous decline in religion that occurred in the 1890s. And the second was the Titanic, which is sort of the episode that kicks off Downton Abbey. And in the Titanic collision, it was actually, in the grand scheme of things, it was a fairly minor disaster. But the symbolic power of the Titanic probably couldn't be more on point. What you saw was an incredibly confident and competent civilization at the height of its artistic production, hitting something incredibly organic, an iceberg, and just flat out sinking. The fast forward 110 years, almost exactly, and you get the crash in the exact same place of the undersea vessel. A bunch of tourists essentially took a submersible, high-pressure submarine down to the bottom of the ocean, and it exploded. And there was a whole drama because people thought that they might be trapped down there and asphyxiating. But it looks like it was just a sudden decompression explosion that destroyed the submarine in one fell swoop, which I guess is more merciful for the people. Rest in peace. Reposes for the dead, obviously. But what's sort of, and I think Morgoth's essay calls this out, what's interesting is that there was a certain amount of modernity in this. The people in this ocean-going vessel were not going to any location to do something. The people on the Titanic were going to New York to conduct business, to live their lives. They were traveling on new technology, a larger than ever ocean liner that was first of its kind, or maybe it was second of its kind. I think that the Gigantic was before the Titanic, and it was to be followed by the Olympic. But this is a new technology, and they were going to do business. In the 21st century version of the Titanic, people are going not to do business, but to be tourists. And not just to be tourists, but to literally relive in simulation the disaster that had occurred 100 years before. So it's a completely meta experience. There's no business and there's no productivity end to this. It's pure sightseeing. And not only that, it's pure sightseeing to simulate a disaster that they ended up essentially replicating in actuality. And I don't know if this is necessarily true or not, but a core part of Morgoth's contention was that there were rumors circulating at the time of this disaster with the Titanic submersible that the problem with this was sort of a competency crisis among the engineers. It was obvious that the CEO had basically ignored some safety concerns from engineers before, and there were statements he had made publicly that he did not want to hire any more old white guys, the same old white guys that were giving him cautions about the nature of the submersible. Now, it turns out that there was no diversity hire who was responsible for this disaster. So that was, I think, a myth, as far as I can tell. But it did sort of frame the disaster in a certain way. As it framed the disaster as a society that prioritized the appearance of diversity and inclusion over concerns having to do with safety and having to do with actual competence and reality. And Morgoth said that this is kind of an analogy for Western civilization, because all throughout the crisis with the submarine, the media was running this morbid clock about them running out of air, and what it would take to lift this submarine from the bottom of the ocean. But it turns out that there is no way to lift a submarine like that from the bottom of the ocean. There's no cable long enough, and the pressure is too high to actually force the thing up without being anchored to a rock at the top of the ocean. The engineering problem is completely impossible. So all of this is completely fictional, but Morgoth points out a key analogy, is that so much of the systems that we rely on an amount of competence that just isn't there. We're all arguing over, well, can we do this? How can we maintain that system? How can we do this system? How can we possibly continue the solvency of our nations anymore? When the die has already been cast, there's not enough competence to make the mainstream institutions work anymore. We're already buried under thousands of feet of ocean water with too much pressure to possibly escape in the form that we were previously. And the rest of this is all just window dressing. And this is kind of in combination with the emergence of the latest Indiana Jones movie. Now, this is an essay that both... It's really weird because Morgoth and Endeavor have a movie review channel that I actually don't watch. I love their Substack essays. They're two of my favorite Substackers. But I don't actually watch their movie review show because it's usually a little too long. Its time slot's the absolute worst for me. And, I don't really like movie reviews anymore. They kind of make me either angry, nostalgic, or increasingly contemptuous of modern culture. And the thing with modern 20th century movies is they're kind of in this weird, uncanny valley. They're good enough to make me hate contemporary movies more and to be kind of envious for when I could go out and watch a genuinely good movie. But they're not good enough to actually be worth my time to invest in. Like, I'm rereading Tolkien's The Silmarillion after rereading Lord of the Rings, and I really got a lot out of that. I really felt like I reconnected with that text, and it's amazing and it's rich. And I read The Silmarillion, and I go back and I read a little bit of the Book of Kings, because that's where I left off with my Bible reading after the Book of Samuel. And the I should say, it's amazing how much they're sort of... You can tell that Tolkien is writing the Silmarillion and is writing The Hobbit for people who have this cultural technology and this cultural literacy good to go. And it's funny that both Morgoth and Endeavor wrote a very similar essay on Indiana Jones. So there's been a recent Indiana Jones that's obviously horrible, soulless, it has no content. And Disney's resurrected this skeleton to go walk around and remind us how much we simultaneously like the original and hate the current one. But it's funny when you think about it, right? The Indiana Jones of... And I'm really... This analysis I'm borrowing from Morgoth. But it really invited us. It was almost an exchange of sorts, right? People are right to point out all of the weird kind of progressive assumptions that Spielberg buries in the old Indiana Jones. Not the least of which is kind of a weird Germanophobia that occupies a lot of pieces of media from this. Someone's correct me. The Silmarillion, right? This is the Silmarillion. It's Silmarillion, right? But what's funny is that what Morgoth points out is that when he watched Indiana Jones, it was kind of like a communion between himself and his grandparents. His grandparents had been veterans of World War II. My grandparents have been veterans of World War II. Not on the right side, admittedly, but So there was this thing where he'd watched it at his grandparents' house, and suddenly the era that his grandfather lived in was brought to life with new magic, and he could go relive this magic in their basement with the whip made out of the clothesline and the sofa being the boulder. And I have very similar memories. Probably everyone in the Anglosphere does have very similar memories of this. And now all of that sort of divorce, we don't like the past. We have no connection to the past. We want to destroy the past. And we don't even really have connections to the artifacts they're running after. This was an interesting thing that Morgoth pointed out, the Raiders of the Lost Ark is sort of the archetypical piece of the puzzle, in the sense that they're running after the Ark of the Covenant, which is the quintessential Holy of Holies for the Jewish faith. It's very similar to the Holy Grail in that it literally holds the Word of God within itself. And it's funny, the film's attitude towards this. The ancient world is full of spiritual life. The modern world is full of science. And the Nazis, and they must be separated. At all costs, the world of science and the world of magic must be kept separate at all costs. And the Nazis, it's funny because the anti-Semitism isn't really brought up at all. And this is the 1980s. I mean, it'd be kind of tacky if it was brought up as anti-Semitism. The Nazis' real crime is that they want to cross the streams. They want to bring this magical piece of religion, of sacredness, into the world of technology. And at the end, it's shown that the only proper use of religion, of true holiness, is to take it, lock it into bureaucracy, into some academic meaninglessness, and bury it deep in the deepest archives and the deepest libraries and the deepest recluses, so that maybe some egghead in the university or some CIA G-man can speculate about it, can assure people that they have it under control. But this is not meant for the world. And it's not so much the anti-Semitism that makes the Nazis evil. It's the desire to bring spirituality imminently into this world. And the problem with the last Indiana Jones is that the world has been completely deprived of this spirituality, even the memory of it. Another great follow-up essay by Endeavor was his statement about the fall of Meta. This is another product that failed this summer, was the Metaverse. And this is another thing that shows you that, I understand technological doomerism and I sympathize. But not all technology takes off just because people want it to take off. And the Metaverse is a good example of this. Mark Zuckerberg poured everything into this concept of the Metaverse, this concept that virtual reality would replace social media. Virtual reality, like what's replaced social media, is simply the next step of social media. So you're already addicted to your phone. Now what's going to happen is your phone's going to eat your entire reality. Your phone is going to be your outside world, and you're going to live all your time inside this digitized space. And here, I cribbed this picture from Endeavor Substack, but this was a picture that comes from a truly dystopic Super Bowl commercial that they ran, I think, in 2021, where some washed up ex-Chuck E. Cheese character is discarded and lives a horrible life on the street, and his life sucks. But then he goes to Meta because he's a discarded, like, Chuck E. Cheese singer, right? But then he goes to Meta, and then the virtual reality, all of the good times that he thought were dead exist again. Everything he liked about the old world exists, but this time in a little digital cell inside Mark Zuckerberg's imaginary reality. Who the hell greenlighted this commercial? Because everyone I knew who saw this commercial immediately projectile vomited, if not physically, then spiritually. The commercial advertised that they literally wanted to concoct a cybernetic cyberpunk dystopia to shove everyone into a cell so that their sucky lives, so that their absolutely squalid lives could be revivified by digital technology. And the only way they could have made this more dystopian and more disgusting is to show people what Meta actually looked like. And what Meta actually looked like was a strictly worse version of Second Life, a technology that had come out 10 years before. This is absolutely I mean, and now Apple is doing the same thing. Like, every company is hopping on this stuff, and every company failed. And, now we are where we are. every company failed to do this virtual reality transition. Because, first of all, because their virtual reality sucked, and there are technical limitations that prevented the technology from accelerating, even as processor speed accelerates. And that is a thing. Not everything is Eliezer Yudkowsky world, where an increase in computing power immediately solves all problems. There are technical limitations, but more than technical limitations, there were just limitations on what people wanted. And believe it or not, Mr. Android Zuckerberg, people did not want to get locked in a digital cell for the rest of their lives so their bodies could rot away while you consolidated the rest of the physical world around them. And, it couldn't be better illustrated by the fact that Mark Zuckerberg in his own personal life is completely dedicated to things like jiu-jitsu and physical fitness and extreme exercise. Mark Zuckerberg is not under any confusion that his physical body is some superfluous thing that can be cast off so that he can live full time inside a virtual reality space. It's very obvious that he doesn't want his own product, and didn't want his own product, and was simply pushing this product on other people. Endeavor ends with this very good line that he says, virtual reality isn't reality. Social media isn't actually society. Artificial intelligence isn't actually intelligence. And that's 100% true. It can do a lot of stuff, but it is fake. The essential organic element, the spiritual element, the value-based element of these things is missing. And there is no value-free thought. There is no experientially free thought. And there is no constraint-free world. And there is no society without sacrifice and without dedication, which social media specifically robs us from. I'm going to do this slide first. Well, yeah, I'll do this slide first. This is something that I kind of saw at the end of Endeavor's essays. I kind of logged on and saw this picture. As far as I'm concerned, this should be, if the internet, or if social media, I should say, were a story, like a trilogy, and it had a beginning in 2010 properly, right? Social media, goes back to 2005, really. And that's when Facebook started exploding. But 2010 is when it really started taking over the world. It began in 2010, and it ended in 2023. This is what I would want the last shot to be. The most irritating person on the internet, the winner of the social media game, PewDiePie, the biggest YouTube channel until Corpo started taking over YouTube, until the algorithm started punishing independent content creators, was this absolutely insufferably irritating Swedish man called PewDiePie, who, in the height of meta-artificiality, was not known for making blog content like videos discussing how to repave your house, or even flexing his muscles, or talking about some esoteric idea, or just being an e-thought. I guess you can't be an e-thought as a guy, but he wasn't even marketing himself like that. PewDiePie got famous for taking videos of himself playing video games. The impossible had happened. The ultimate meta experience in entertainment. Video games had essentially jumped the shark and become even more meta, to the point where we were watching other people play video games. And PewDiePie was the poster for this. This is the Ne Plus Ultra. Don't play video games yourself. Watch me play video games for you, and you can comment on them. In many ways, I thought this is the most depressing development was Twitch. You basically have to go to Meta to get something that was more dehumanizing. I guess Chat GPT. You'd either have to incorporate large language models or go to Meta in order to properly in order to properly get more meta or more dehumanized than watching somebody else play video games. And, I'm guilty of this on my wife's channel. I've done some gaming streams because, it happens sometimes, right? It's an experiment. Nobody watches them. But this, as a cultural feature, the only thing streaming video games demonstrated the only thing streaming video games said about us as a popular form of media was that we had absolutely nothing to say. All we could do was just stare at our belly buttons. But then, at the bottom point of this, at the abyss of this content creation, and then, PewDiePie, the irritating Swedish man, whose voice sounds like nails on a chalkboard, has, somehow dates this northern Italian supermodel. I can't, what's her name? Marzia, who's, again, a very attractive woman, but whose voice sounds like a transmission having problems. It sounds like a transmission squeaking. And so for a while, I guess it did get even more dehumanizing and irritating, because now, as opposed to having one person streaming video games, you had two people reacting to video game streams with two incredibly grating, irritating voices. And so you seem to be like we were reaching the singularity of irritating self-referentials. But then, in kind of a happy development, we learned a few things about PewDiePie. The first thing was that he actually had interest in reading books. He listed a series of must-read books, and it included things like Yukio Mishima, Dostoevsky. I think it might have even included Uncle Ted. I don't remember that, but he got huge criticism for having all these scary right-wing authors. He actually married the woman who was his girlfriend at the time, Marzia, and they had a wonderful wedding, and now they have a child. And I mean, this was the end of the internet right now. We can shut it down right now. The two most irritating people in the world come together and actually find a new beginning in marriage and in life. And if there's one ambition, I could say it's that we kind of reverse the stream of social media. This is something that Mark Zuckerberg wanted to do for the longest time and couldn't, is that he wanted to be able to build real community from an online basis. This, and I'm giving you kind of the spiel that I gave at the conference, not my main talk, but the one that I gave as part of the Old Glory Club. This is the purpose of basket weaving. And this is one of the reasons why I am passionate always about promoting basket weaving. And I'm going to be promoting basket weaving on this channel. I'll try to make better propaganda for it as much as I possibly can. The purpose of social media, this is not what it's good at, but this should be our purpose as humans, is to develop real relationships from our interactions on social media that exist autonomously from social media. You use the computer and you get off the computer. There's this famous, to bring it not full circle because I'm not nearly done with this talk yet, but there's this famous expression. This is, by the way, if you ever want to read Das Kapital, you can skip it. This is the main money shot, so to speak, is this formula that goes CMC MCM. So for capitalists, the flow of money is they have got commodities, they get money, and then they get more commodities, which therefore can appreciate. Whereas ordinary people who are not capital holders use money to get commodities. I'm sorry, it's the opposite way around, right? Non-capital holders have commodities, they use it to get money, and then they use it to get more commodities so that they consume. Whereas capitalists have money, they use it to get commodities, and then they trade those commodities to get more money. Therefore, their stock in the market appreciates, where people who are in a labor relationship, their share of the market depreciates. And that sentiment is, I would argue, not original to Marx, but is a genuine insight that you can get from Das Kapital. I think a similar thing is going on in social media. Social media should go material reality, computer, back to material reality. It does go computer, material reality as a brief interruption, then back to the computer, thus leaving you in every interaction poorer than when you started. We should seek in every interaction with the computers to go to the computer, get something specific, and then take it back to material reality in a way such that you can tell people what you got from this interaction, or at least tell yourself what you got from this interaction with the digital world after you actually return from this interaction with the digital world. And this is something that I logged on to the Basket Weavers today, or a few months ago. And I saw the best post I ever saw there. Something that I said, I'm doing the right thing. When the guy said, I don't really watch Academic Agent and The Distributist or Morgoth anymore because I more or less just absorbed the messages they had to tell me. And now I'm focused on building in real life with the ideology that I've gotten from them. And I'm like, perfect. More power to you. That's the best news anyone's ever told me, that begun with, I don't watch you on YouTube anymore. If you're not watching me on YouTube to go build in the real world, go build in the real world. I like to think that I have a podcast that's reasonably informative and reasonably entertaining, and that you can perhaps put on in the background when you're doing something completely mindless, or, maybe you're just, I've had moments, I have some painted miniatures from those moments in the day where you just can't do anything productive. You just can't do anything that involves higher parts of your brain. And all you can do is just veg out, and you put on a podcast in the background. And maybe this is your time for that. But your online presence cannot replace the real world. The real world has to be the product. So I'm going to go on here before my last topic and just go over some things that I talked about this in the conference. And, I really want to emphasize when we're doing this basket weaving stuff, just how much of like a Herculean effort this is. We are trying to do the very thing that no one's been able to succeed with before. We're trying to do something that social media is not designed to do, and that all the algorithmic incentives are designed not to have happen, which is that people who you meet online become your real friends in real life. And during the conference, as sort of a secondary talk, I listed 9 points in basket weaving that always have to be kept in mind. I'm going to elaborate this. This is sort of a rough draft of an essay, maybe even a book I'll write on basket weaving and how to do this. But this is how it goes. So the first thing, these are in no particular order. But I will say this, the first 2 points I always want to say. Basket weaving is an engine for trust. So if I were to say basket weaving is a ship, optics are its hull, and trust is its sail. The ship only moves and only works if the sail has wind in it, if people are trusting each other. It only stays afloat if the optics maintain. You're dealing in basket weaving, and I don't think basket weaving is under intense scrutiny. I don't think it's not going to come up in any media reports. It's completely innocuous. But at the same time, we have to be aware at all times that optics is an issue. This is why conferences we run have strict dress codes. I don't like wearing ties. I like wearing suits. I wear a suit every day for work. This is me at my most casual. But something about the tie, I feel like it makes me look fat. And it also constricts I feel like I project more without it. I feel like I speak more confidently. So I do the West Coast thing with the button-up suit and the without the tie. And I think it looks more casual, more executive, as a matter of fact. So the optics is always essential, and I think you should carry that forward when you do basket weaving. When you do basket weaving, you always want to be asking, how am I making myself a trustworthy person? And how am I building deep relationships? That's another third point here. You always want to try to go for deep relationships rather than broad ones. Basket weaving is not social media. It's not about collecting friends. It's about saying, in my area, I have a few people who I can really fall back on, who I know are stand-up guys that can help me out. This is something I also want to say, and I don't have this as one of my points, but I mentioned this at the conference. It's really important in building deep relationships to kind of ask people for some favors or to provide some favors. And I don't know if we're necessarily at that point yet, but what do friends do? What do neighbors do for each other? They help each other out. And eventually basket weaving is going to have to move in that direction. A little out of order, but basket weaving does have to have a certain amount of gatekeeping, right? We always mention that gatekeeping is necessary. But you always want to be using division rather than kicking people out or erecting some hard barrier. Someone said, okay, this that is not working on entropy. It looks like it's working. Okay, well, whatever. I should not pay attention to entropy until it's actually done because I'm interrupting myself on the live stream, but there we go. Where was I? You want to get into the mode where you trust people, and giving and receiving favors is a core part of that. Division also is important. So if you have some people who are Orthodox, some people who are Catholic, some people who are Protestant, some people who have children, some people who don't, these are just natural divisions, and it shouldn't be any hard feeling. If you find yourself as the only parent or the only single person or the only Protestant in a given area, to me that means that basket weaving for you needs to be a more general excursion where you're just trying to find political allies, or if you want people to do those specific things with you, you're going to have to expand the circle. I know everyone here, we're all post-liberals. Discrimination is a good thing, right? But there is there's just the reality that whenever someone leaves you out of something, that sort of lizard part of your brain pipes up, and there's a potential for spurging out. Just leave that aside. When you're basket weaving, regularity is a core strength, and scheduling works. Weaves aren't weaves unless they happen at a regular interval. Once every month, once every 2 months. Every year we do this. Every summertime we do that. Every 4th of July we have a barbecue. Every fall we have, I don't think we've done any kind of Thanksgiving celebration, but that could be a thing, right? Or, for instance, a Guy Fawkes Day celebration if you're in England, if you want to celebrate burning Catholic monarchists, if that's your thing. And at all times, scheduling. One thing that I've noticed that's worked really, really well for myself is to take events that me and my family were going to do anyway that are reasonably sort of open and just say, hey, we're going to be doing this. If you want to join us, just pop on by, buy yourself a movie ticket and we'll join you for coffee afterwards if you're in the area. This helps because it allows people to get more integrated. It allows bonds to be built thicker. And it also helps structure your time a little bit more. A lot of young men don't realize this, but you are your calendar and your habits. This is one of the reasons why I always put family time ahead of live streaming, even if it causes me to be an hour late. It's my pleasure, because how you govern your schedule governs your values. And if you're doing something and it's not a calendar event, it's somehow not important or not something that's really a part of your life yet. Scheduling also allows you to kind of break down boundaries. Another thing I say here is purpose drives cohesion. So in addition to asking and getting favors in basket weaving, weaves, I'll make a more general statement here. And this is something that, a lot of the organizations like Beowulf, like OGC, this is all part of the internal discussion we're having. I'm not airing dirty laundry here. This is just, whenever you create an organization or a group of people, especially men. Women, this is different. Women can get together just to get together, which is strange. This is why there can be a women's hour that's very good, but men's hour seems weird, in our groups. Like Poe's Law, the channel Poe's Law, run by Poe, has a podcast called Women's Hour. I know that there is an equivalent men's hour, but it's never made sense to me, because when men get together, they always meet for some specific purpose, to pursue some particular end. Find out things that you think need to be done in your area, and organize your get-togethers around those things. Obviously, for religious people, church-going is one of those things. For family people, organizing family outings is a big deal. Barbecues. Recreation. We put down recreation, but recreation is something that has to be done. This is something that COVID's really taken from us. Everyone now thinks that recreation is going home, sitting down in front of Netflix, and getting Uber Eats. And then, I don't know, what else do people do? Smoke pot? I guess if you're really young or don't have a life, right? But everything now we do is all passive entertainment. People forget that the great American pastime is like baseball. And even if you don't like baseball, the idea is that, one of the better American movies, and it's kind of a shitty movie, but I still love it, is Steven Spielberg's Field of Dreams. And the whole point of Field of Dreams is not playing baseball. It's not the game of baseball. It's the preparation that goes into making baseball happen, which is as important as baseball is. One of the critical features of baseball is that it's actually kind of complicated to have a pickup game of baseball. Look, there's a certain amount of organization that needs to go into it. You can't just plump down on your couch, hit a button, and be playing baseball. You have to get the guys together. You have to organize the rosters. You have to have sides. You have to have a point scoring system. You have to have a baseball diamond, which is a core part of Field of Dreams. These are things that are all preparation. And the thing is that recreation requires preparation. We shouldn't feel good about ourselves when our recreational hobbies are all antisocial things. They all should require some effort, and we shouldn't feel bad when we have to work to make our recreation actually happen. I think that's actually one of the reasons why people appreciate things, or it's one of the reasons why I kind of appreciate deep board games like Magic or Warhammer, is you actually have to prepare to play the game. There's a meta game, right? So anyone who plays that game actually has to get involved in thinking about it beforehand. That preparation necessitates that people who sit down and do the thing have a common purpose, which drives the cohesion of the group. And in some ways, I think that a large reason of why people play these advanced games is just because the game requires that sense of common purpose in order to be a participant to begin with. I think that, ultimately basket weaving will move to more serious matters like education, like resource sharing, like skill sharing. I think I already said education, like workforce improvement, like eventually politics, block voting, the obtaining of sinecures that periodically come out on the local level and that we eventually will need to organize the securing of in order to take the next step forward in this process. But before we learn how to work hard, before we learn how to do politics hard, we have to kind of learn how to play hard, not to borrow a phrase from the gay community, but okay, I'm not down with gay culture, but they got one thing right, and work hard, play hard is one of them, right? And the last two things is always be expanding and always be improving. Expanding means is that basket weaving is not meant to be autonomous. It's meant to get more and more and more people into it so that eventually the basket weaves will split off into other new aligned organizations, new gaming groups, new education groups, new Catholic groups, new Orthodox groups, new whatever denomination of Protestant group you are groups. These things are supposed to be a seedbed, and because of that, expansion is key. One of the reasons why gatekeeping has to be minimal inside basket weaving groups. And the last thing is always be improving. Now, look, I've been known to organize basket weaving drop-ins around truly stupid stuff, like playing nerdy board games. And that's good. It gets people together, right? But you always kind of want to be pushing more to the elevated stuff. You want to go from Magic the Gathering to Handel's Messiah, or to regularly watching classical music. You always want to be pushing up the hill. You always want to be asking, what's the next thing that could really improve things for the people, for the young men that I'm hanging out with? One thing that, Aaron McIntyre, I don't know if I'm really exposing him in saying this, but he revealed to me when I met him in person that he was a quite advanced Magic the Gathering player. And as such, he was very involved in a game store. Now, in game stores, if you ever frequent them, you'll realize that they have a certain set of regular men who don't really have their lives together. And one of the things that Aaron McIntyre said to me is that one of his goals at being a game store regular was always to take the guys there and encourage them to do things like hiking, to do things like martial arts training, to do things like firearm practice. Hey, if we're doing Magic the Gathering anyway, how about afterwards we go to the range? Or, we grab a beer and then talk about planning a hike tomorrow morning. It's, Friday night Magic, Saturday morning 10-mile hike. That sounds like the perfect combination for somebody in their 20s. Presumably you're getting a dating life in there somewhere, but, I'll leave that to people who have a pulse on the fairer sex more. Always be improving. You want to push people to get better. And with that, that's the end of my basket weaving advice. Now, before we finish out this lecture, which is kind of not a lecture, I wanted to get to the last thing. This stupid shit. Let's talk about the Ratchet. Oh boy, what else happened this summer? The Ratchet's happening again. Don't you remember the Ratchet? Don't you love the Ratchet? It feels like you're winning and you're not winning. Congratulations, guys. We got her. We converted Anna Kasparian. She's one of us now. She's a right-winger. The Armenian wonder who somehow in the brain genius move got her name working for an organization that's called the Young Turks. I bet her Armenian ancestors are looking down from heaven, pulling their hair out for this new Young Turk. But at any rate, despite her shitlibbery in the past, it now appears that Anna Kasparian has left the left. This is such an unpredictable thing because guess what, guys? The left went a little too far. It started castrating kids and turning Anna's nice, safe, millennial housing neighborhood into a drug-riddled shit show. And worst yet, worse than causing a crime spree that took out thousands of lives. Worse than castrating kids and exposing them to rank sexuality that's totally inappropriate. The absolute worst thing it did to Anna Kasparian is it insulted her womanhood. It told Anna Kasparian that she was defined not as a woman, but as a birthing person. And she didn't have a vagina, but a bonus hole. So now, Anna, you're a birthing person with a bonus hole. And you're no longer a leftist, but a filthy right-winger. But because you're so famous, you get to be the king of the right-wingers. Because that's what's healthy, right? The Young Turks are now the rightmost end of the political spectrum. And of course, who better than to inaugurate this new era of left-right consilience than our own favorite centrists, Adam and Sitch, who had Anna, in a move that completely blew me away, had Anna Kasparian on for a 3-hour stream, because of course their streams are even longer than mine. They go on for 3 hours. They don't even say as much as mine do. They go on for 3 hours and talk about absolutely nothing. They play harmonica and do silly jokes and make fun of the same set of Vosh videos again and again and again. But this time they had Anna Kasparian on. And oh my God, Anna Kasparian is... the left left her. She's looking for a new label. And guess what, guys? The new label is radical centrist, which is like the right wing, but actually reasonable. Actually ready to sit down and have a conversation. Who takes this seriously? As a reaction, R.N. McIntyre, I think it was R.N. McIntyre and Geo from Geo. I always say it's the Geo and Prude podcast. When I listen to it, I forget what it's actually called. Giant Art Productions is his podcast, but he has a podcast also with the Traditionalist where they discuss things that I watch periodically. It was a really great podcast. He was on R.N. McIntyre's channel, and they discussed the Ratchet, and you probably should watch it. But I reach out, and they say, well, Dave really hates Adam and Sitch, and I don't know why. And I say, like, look, guys, I tag Adam and Sitch. I don't hate Adam and Sitch. They just don't listen to me. I explained to them Italian elite theory, and they act like I'm explaining gibberish to them, even though it's an established theory. And then they block me. Well, they block me. And then I guess someone must have forwarded them this tweet, because 5 seconds later, Adam unblocks me, only to tell me that my Italian elite theory is utter bullshit and that I should read more about modern monetary theory and selectorate theory. And then when I pushed back and said, well, what you're saying is wrong here and here and here, but I respect the disagreement, we should discuss this more. At that hint of a disagreement, he immediately blocks me. Because guess what, guys? Anna Kasparian, when you think about it, isn't that really the rightmost point of acceptable discourse? That's just the pendulum swinging back, Swings out to chemical castration of children, swings back to Anna Kasparian and social democracy, and basically Hillary Clinton. I don't know how anyone knows how this doesn't work. On my way back from this Holdings conference, I was stuck in the airport for 24 hours in one of the worst delays I've ever had. And as I was waiting to get back to New Jersey from Tennessee, sitting in, I think, Myrtle Beach, scrolling through my phone looking for something to distract me from the fact that I was essentially burning an extra vacation day, I happened upon Adam and Sitch interviewing, of all persons, another mystery adversary from the early days of 2014, no other than Brianna Wu. People remember this. Brianna Wu was a fake game developer. I don't know, she was maybe a real game developer. Certainly not a real woman by my definition. But posing as a game developer, now apparently posing as a politician. They were reaching out to Brianna Wu on the subject of how to protect trans children. Because you've got to reach out to the extremes. If you don't reach out to the extremes, are you really even a conversation show? You got to reach out to gender-affirming care for 13-year-olds. But come on, we can't entertain, James Burnham. We can't talk about some of the most prominent philosophers of the 20th century. That's nuts. Are you kidding me? Let's bring on Brianna Wu to talk about how we need to feed 14-year-olds, puberty blockers. I don't understand how people don't see this, because for the 20 minutes I watched, Adam and Sitch were lightly pushing back on this idea of gender-affirming care for trans children. Brandon Wu was like, well, there are a lot of people who take it too far. There are a lot of people who take this stuff a little too far, and I agree with you. I'm a centrist too. But we need to look out for what's right for trans children. And I'm really worried that parents might be abusing their trans children. It's just like, my concerns are just like the concerns we had with the Catholic sex abuse crisis. Priests were abusing children, and I'm worried about parents abusing children. And Adam and Sitch are like, oh, yeah. I don't think that the data, I don't think that the peer-reviewed studies necessarily show that, transitioning 13-year-olds is a good idea right now. But I can tell, because you frame this in protecting kids from being, abused by their parents, abused in this case meaning, not being surgically transitioned, because you frame this in a way of preventing child abuse, we know you're a good actor. We can compromise with this. This could be productive, right? This could be. Do Adam and Sitch have no idea how frame games work? I mean, this is basic stuff. This is one of the reasons why, maybe they're just too dumb. I mean, maybe Adam's too dumb to figure this out. I'm pretty sure Sitch knows how to frame games work. Most of a conversation or a debate is won or lost based on who's asking the questions and what are the underlying assumptions. This is a great example. What are the underlying assumptions of Brianna Wu asking how we can save trans children from being abused by their parents? Just like the Catholic Church. Well, the assumptions are that children, that not transitioning children is abuse, which is granted by the premise of the question in the frame. The other frame assumptions that are more important are that somehow teachers are less likely to abuse the children than parents are. What is the proclivity of abuse between three groups of people? Teachers, parents, and priests. Well, this is how it goes, right? Parents, unsurprisingly, are the least likely to abuse their children, adjusted for how much time they spend with them. It's way lower. Then, more likely, but still not very likely to abuse children are priests. It happens sometimes, very rarely. Then, take those two levels of child abuse rates, skyrocket it like 5 orders of magnitude, and way up here, you get the abuse rate of teachers. Astronomically higher rates of abuse than either priests, and way, way, way more higher abuse rates than parents. Yet somehow, the entire frame is turned up on its head. The default assumption should be that teachers are abusing children who need to be protected by their parents. Not that their parents might be abusing them and that need to be... It would be like it would be equivalent. Getting teachers to essentially spy on parents to make sure that they aren't abusing their children is like me buying for my home a pit bull and training the pit bull to attack my wife in the event that my wife abused my son. It's that freaking insane. It's like there's no understanding of the probabilities of abuse in these scenarios. This is absolutely nuts. Yet in the frame that Adam and Sitch developed, parents are the party that is most likely to abuse children, and the children are being defended by trans activists, teachers, and psycho internet personalities like Brianna Wu. That's the frame. And it's nuts. I don't know how to help these people. I know there's a reason why I watch Adam and Sitch, and an academic agent pointed this out as well. Adam and Sitch are basically midwits, which is why they also misrepresent. This is also why they're interesting, right? They represent the average viewer, the average person that's out there, that's sort of gettable, that's in the middle of the road, that's looking for answers. And for that reason, they're interesting. Now, I said this a long time ago about Sargon, what made him interesting, or one of the things that made him interesting, was the fact that his positions were more or less the center of discourse. He represented the everyman very, very well. Now, the thing with Sargon is that he was way, way, way smarter than the average person. He just had their sensibilities. Whereas Adam and Sitch are either just as midwitty as your average midwit, or they've stoned themselves to the point where they're at that level of intelligence, or they're just plain bad actors. Because I don't believe for a second that anyone can't see what's going on in the frame of Anna Kasparian's conversion to the left. If Anna Kasparian becomes the new acceptable right wing, what will have been accomplished by the last 10 years since Gamergate will be an enormous lurch to the left, away from the very principles that Gamergate was supposedly trying to fight for. What happens if Brianna Wu's framing around the safety of trans children prevails? Is again an enormous lurch to the left, where the group that is least likely to abuse children, parents, is portrayed as the greatest risk of abuse of children, and the group that's the most likely to abuse children is portrayed as their saviors. If this is what centrism produces, there is no need to play this game because it's absolute insanity. But this is the last slide, so I guess I'll finish it here. I'm going to put on the intermission for probably a minute because it's really, really late and I don't want to end this past 12:30. But yeah, I'll just give it a little bit of time to get some more water and come back. All right, that wasn't too long. I'm going to make the super chat answering a little bit faster so I don't completely run out of time. There seems like there's a lot of them. Oops, let's... Now, browser, don't fail me and actually post these things here. Perfect. Oh, God, I hope this means that the Entropy API is finally updating properly. Kai Makata in an unsuper chat says, I'm coming to your house, Dave. To weave on the internet? No, in real life. Okay, hey, if you're in town, we can totally weave. You know, I do want to have internet friends over to my over for dinner. I think the dinner party is a great way to communicate these things, to build relationships. I failed to mention that, but let's get on to the super chats here. Echo for $20 USA. I'm going to pull up the stream here. By the way, guys, before I read the super chat, this is the last time we're going to be hearing the intro violin piece. It's a piece by Alistair Fraser and Natalie Haas. And I went to someone else and got a commission of another Alistair Fraser fiddle piece, but this one I own the actual rights to. And so I can play it without triggering any DRM stuff. I thought that because it was a live session, it wouldn't trigger any DRM stuff, but I guess not. But this new recording should be, it's very similar to the one currently, but it's 100% owned by me. And it won't trigger YouTube DRM. Or it better not, otherwise I just wasted my money. So anyway, yeah, a new violin piece for the intro. Hopefully one for the intermission as well. Is the stream in F? No, it shouldn't be. I should be broadcasting here. Okay, yeah, I was hoping to contract a friend to do the fiddle piece, but the offers I had kind of fell through, and I was just so sick and tired of. I mean, I do want to spend my money in the network, so to speak, among political allies. But I can't wait for like 6 months to get, I can't wait for 6 months to have my streams monetized. That's not going to work. So This is something that we're gonna have to work on. But I just went to a local professional. Okay. All right, Echo for $20 USA. I had a discussion with a friend about LA's release of about LA's with release without bail policy for nonviolent crimes. How it violates their civil right to a speedy trial. We disagreed on the solution. I argued that the state has a duty to protect and serve the community, and this policy runs against that idea. I mean, yeah, the right to protect the community comes before any right you have to a speedy trial, unfortunately. I mean, not having a speedy trial is a sign of government incompetence. It needs to be fixed instantly or as soon as possible. But you need to get your underwear on before your pants, so to speak. And if you don't have safe streets, no one's going to give a shit whether criminals are getting to the docket faster. That's not going to matter. Order precedes law, always. It shouldn't be law and order. It should be order and law. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say about this. The crime problems in the United States are out of control. Now, you'd think with the Anna Kasparian relapse into sanity that progressives who live in cities would fix this problem the way they did in the 90s, and there'd be a return to sanity. But I'm not entirely sure that's going to happen, because it appears, like I said before, that they kicked down the ladder after they climbed on top of it. All of the mechanisms they have to walk back their pronouncements about crime and incarceration are now prevented by certain ideological moves that they made in decades before. It's like what Nietzsche said in his, was it Twilight of the Idols? What the father believes in jest, the son believes as religion. I think Nietzsche was full of shit in the case of Christianity, but in this particular feature, it's absolutely the case. Progressives, when they talked about ending mass incarceration, they were really, the boomers were talking hypothetically. They didn't like locking people up. But now what they're doing is they're essentially experiencing hundreds of more murders on the streets, just so they can give, so they can put black people, so that black people can have shorter sentences, bail sentences, or not. I guess bail is not a sentence. They can have shorter bail terms. That's absolutely nuts. I mean, this no sane government can put up with this. It's an obvious failure. Anyway, going on to the next one. Echo for $5. Is there a stronger argument for my positions? I understand that it's a violation of civil rights, but having a revolving door for offenders doesn't strike me as a solution to the civil rights violation. Sparkling water here. Andrew Tate would be very disappointed. Okay, well, I guess this is the end of your question, Echo. But, I mean, there's two ways to answer this. The way to answer this is, this is why rights, the kind of autistic way to answer this, but sort of the fundamentally correct one, is to point out, don't try this, but what you really want to do is point out how this whole idea of rights is stupid. In a world where you can't be safe on the streets, what does it mean to have a right to a speedy trial? That's absolutely insane. Like I said, rights are just promises that the government makes to you. If the government isn't stably enforcing itself, if it isn't stably handling the crime rate, the idea that it has some ability to enforce other rights or some responsibility to do that is absolutely nuts. That's obviously not going on. If I was to say, put this in a debate context, I would go to your progressive friend and say, well, apparently here there's a conflict between two rights. There's the right of people to have safe streets and to not be the victim of reoffenders, which is essentially what a bail term is doing. Most crime happens from reoffense. And the reoffense, people go on crime sprees. So if they can commit a crime, get arrested, get back on the streets, their probability of committing another crime is exponentially increased because they're at that moment of their lives where they don't give a shit. Bail prevents this from happening. It prevents daisy chaining crimes from occurring. So by removing bail, you are essentially, based on our knowledge of crime statistics, increasing the rate of crime. Knowing that, what's in front of us right now is the contest between two rights. The right to not be a victim of violent crime and the right to have a marginally more speedy trial. Which right do you think should prevail? And I think most reasonable people will think the right to not be the victim of a violent criminal is the more important right, which they're correct about. Ben White for $5 USA. Can you explain the concept of elite overproduction? Do you think that the drop in college enrollment will help curb elite overproduction? Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, there's two forces here. The first one is sort of the competence crisis and the decline in IQ generally. And the second one is like the genuine crisis of elite overproduction. So elite overproduction is caused by promises of affluence. So society experiences a boom period and it promises a level of affluence to its citizens for loyalty to the regime. Now, really, if the government was being honest, the real reason to be loyal to the regime is that the regime is actively respecting you and is actively defending your group of people from outsiders. And hopefully also the regime is making sure that you have the ability to improve your group, your people, both individually and collectively. And as long as you're living in order with the other peoples and other groups that are in your society. That's the real reason to be loyal to a regime. But when civilizations get decadent, they start justifying themselves in terms of material goods that they literally can distribute to people. This is, of course, the famous line from Rome, breads and circuses. Once the religion of Rome is no longer the majesty of the city gods, but rather the bread and circuses, the civilization has to promise material wealth and affluence to people, and it therefore has to promise them elite positions. The problem is that there's only a certain amount of elite positions to go around, and the affluence is not the product of the elites themselves, but rather elite status just confers on you the privilege of being able to reap the rewards of that society. So the classic example in our own time is with the baby boomers. In the baby boomer generation, everyone who got to college and got through college and then wasn't a complete fuck up did reasonably well to the point where they could afford a house and maintain employment, as long as, again, they didn't have some huge breakdown or something like that. But this is just not the case for their children. And the thing is that the baby boomers did not interpret correctly the reason why college-educated people were affluent. College-educated people were affluent not because their degree in French poetry gave them some set of skills that allowed them to compete in a global market. That was bullshit. What the degree gave them was a certain access to prestige jobs, that of which there were a limited number, and which gave them a certain share in the economy of the United States and a certain share of the power of the United States. All of these things were essentially very inelastic resources, if not zero-sum resources. Political power is strictly zero-sum. Housing is, you can build more houses, but it's just highly, highly, highly inelastic. It does not expand very easily with the demand. So what they did for the boomers was they brought in a bunch of cheap labor, which immediately made purchasing things for the boomers way easier, which allowed boomers who went to college to convince themselves that college was a golden ticket to an affluent life. And then the next iteration they sold was, well, we'll just do the same thing for your kids. Everyone's going to go to college, and then therefore everyone will be rich. But it didn't work like that. People got out of college, and they ended up working at Starbucks. worse than working at Starbucks. They ended up working at Starbucks with $30,000 to $50,000 of college debt on their shoulders and no ability to pay that back. That's absolutely insane. There's no way to justify that expenditure. Nobody. In that case, what's happened is elite overproduction. Now, the drop in college enrollment is going to curve this, Ben White. It's going to curve that significantly. But the bigger problem is that people do this. This is another boomer thing too. They're like, well, actually, inflation isn't that bad. It's just 7%. We had that in the 70s. Yeah, dude. But the reason why inflation is so low is because you're counting inflation of things like iPhones, which have not actually inflated. And because of the adjustment we do on technology increasing, getting better, it appears that you get a way better iPhone than you could before for way less money. But people don't want better and better iPhones. What they want is good jobs that secure them enough money to get married. They want to be able to buy houses, and they want to live in an area where they can educate their children, and they want to wield political power. All four of those things are incredibly inelastic, and the mass immigration that we used to buy boomers, the previous iteration of these things at a large scale, actually decreases the access of these things, because every immigrant laborer we bring in the first generation to provide the cheap labor to make the first iteration of these things then becomes a customer for these things in the second generation, thus making it harder to purchase overall. So really, I would look less at who's getting the college degrees, Ben White, than in the prices of houses and the accessibility that the average person has at actually buying a house. That's the important thing. Ben White, for another $5. I was taking a look at the houses in my area, and they are so much more expensive than when my parents bought them, okay? Even with a good job, it's going to take me a decade to have enough for a down payment. Are there any big picture solutions for this? The big picture solution for this is to build intentional communities in red states and to found new towns. In America, there's a very easy solution for this. In Europe, in places like the UK, the only solution is in some way, shape, or form to halt immigration. I don't know what the solution for that is in a country that is already full. In America, there's going to be a new land rush to the center of this country, and that's ultimately the solution, is for a lot of jobs to go remote and for people to get less picky about the specific places that they live and to focus more about the community and to live among people who are ideologically aligned with them. I would much rather live in Oklahoma around people who I liked, who wanted to build a common future together, than to live in California or New York with a bunch of horrific, soulless progressives that just want to see the world burn. And that's going to be the transition that, at least in the new world, will be eventually the solution. But a lot of that super chat I've already answered. So I'm going to go on to Darth Calhoun for $3 USA. Hey Dave, I've done some touching grass. I took a girl out on a second date, and we've been clicking well. Smart dispensations, both Catholic, and we can have some intellectual conversations. She also isn't oblivious to modernity. She hates consumerism and materialism. She has baby fever, which is rare for a 21-year-old. And honestly, I think God has guided me to her. On Hinge, of all places. Any advice? It sounds like she's a catch, Darth Calhoun. The one thing I would say is, it's second date. Look. Far from me to be a modern person and say that you need to, take your time. But, come up with a time frame for this. There are certain, just see how it plays out. Pursue this girl. She sounds like a catch. She sounds like a really good person. She's having intellectual conversations with you, and she still likes kids. This is great. Introduce her to your friends. Introduce her to your social group. Find things that you like doing together. Develop hobbies you like doing together. And make sure that you have the major beats of your life together worked out. Talk about what you want in terms of marriage, and then, wait for, keep on dating her for a month or two and see how it proceeds. Me dating my own wife, she wanted a ring, what was it? I think she wanted a ring like 4 months after we started dating. She had to wait 9 months. Which is, I guess for Catholic dating is pretty long. For secular dating, I know women who've waited 9 years for a ring. So, maybe I shouldn't use my own paused, social circle as a measure for this stuff. But, it's just proceed with caution. If she has to wait a month or two longer for her developments, that's actually probably a good sign. You want to make sure that you're aligned, that you've got a good rapport together. Look, on the first 2 dates, you really don't know each other yet. You kind of need to see each other in crisis. Like, I think, unfortunately, me and my wife, I had this one big travel fiasco, and she got to see me really flustered one day. And she kind of saw me at my most vulnerable, and she still came back. You need experiences like that, where you see each other and you're not at your prime. She doesn't have her makeup on. You're seeing each other at their most vulnerable places. And if it still works there, then you've got a good thing going. But, it sounds like you do have a good thing going. So I don't want to dissuade you from that. Ben White, again, for $3 USA. Should white-collar reactionaries invest time in acquiring blue-collar skills? If so, what? With the coming of CBDCs, I'm afraid of the state or central bank can restrict our ability to conduct commerce. I'm not bullish on, the acronym is Central Bank Digital Currencies, and I'm not bullish on them. I think that this is going to be meta. Don't quote me on that, it could be wrong, but I think this is going to be something that falls flat. Look, the dollar is the dollar, gold is gold, work is work. We can transact as long as we have open areas of communication and as long as we build networks of trust. If we have networks of trust, we can figure out the specific token we want to communicate that trust. We can move products, we can move labor to where it needs to be. Just focus on getting skills you need. And as a modern worker, I think that's going to involve some blue-collar skills and some white-collar skills. Now, I'm a person who has mostly white-collar skills. I've got a PhD in a technical field. I'm an engineer. I do coding most of the day. But I like to think that I have a number of practical in real life skills. I have people skills. I have speaking skills. I actually can use tools. I'm not qualified to be a plumber. I have the exact opposite of a green thumb, and Lord knows I've tried. I have taken welding and woodchopping classes, a number of them. I'm not great, and I'm really out of practice. But make sure that you're a well-rounded person. In this modern era, in this era of chaos, you kind of want to be a Swiss Army knife. Women need to realize this too. I'm not going to name names, but I know a number of women who've dated or have married guys. They have white-collar jobs. And then something happens. They get laid off. It doesn't work out. They have a career change. But then instead of doing what I think most responsible men would do and just getting a job as a Starbucks guy or as a gas station attendant, they just kind of tap out. They go full need again. They do the worst thing. They go full need, and their woman is still there with them. And she's working the blue-collar job, and they're off in la-la land. These guys are all progressive for the most part who do this, but this is just the most important thing you have as a man is versatility and professionalism and the ability to learn new skills as they are required. If you can learn new skills and bounce back, that is going to be your number one thing, be they blue or white-collared skills. Focus on that. And also have a plan. This is another thing too. As a guy, another thing your woman will value is just having a plan. The thing is that whatever she's managing, so women will manage a number of things in the household, but try to have a plan for all of them. Have a plan for your budget. Have a plan for your eventual living situations. Have a plan for what you're going to be doing going into the future professionally. And if you have a 10-year plan, say like there could be disruptions, but I'm going to come back from them. If you have a plan, if you're a man who makes a plan and you're a man who has versatility, that is what women want. There's this really funny tweet that Juniper Tree, friend of the channel, made. I don't actually know how old she is. So she somehow seems like she must be older and younger at the same time. But she has this like incredibly like woman tweet where it's like, guys, I just think that for myself, I find competence really sexy. It's like, that's every woman, guys. Every woman finds competence sexy. And you don't have to be like Mozart, virtuoso on the piano. You don't have to be Don Draper. What women want is they want a guy that can make a plan and follow through. And that if that plan falls through, he can be versatile and resilient enough to pick himself back up and come up with a new plan. Those are the two things. And everything else is just kind of details that you fill in. Some brawn, some brain, some white collar, some blue collar, etc. The big thing is the plan and the recovery. Dreadnought for $5. Dave, I hate to contradict Morgoth, but you can actually lift heavy objects from the ocean floor. You can take down blasted bags of diesel fuel because diesel is lighter than water. And okay, good point. Yeah, you're right. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Dreadnought. Yeah, so he came up with the engineering solution. Great lateral thinking. You do not actually need to pull against the pressure of the open floor when you're lifting submersibles off the ocean bed. As Dreadnought is saying, you can simply take flotation devices, pull them down to the ocean floor, and then have those flotation devices lift up the object against the pressure of the ocean. All right, that's a very good engineering observation, Dreadnought. You have caught me out. Very good. Very, very, very good thinking. Julio for $5 USA. Hi, Dave. Varg is back on Twitter. Oh, boy, another pagan spurg. Oh, at least this one knows death metal. Although I was never a death metal fan, I always liked progressive rock more. I just love King Crimson, and, that was it. Varg is back on Twitter. Growing up, he was an urban legend in our city, so seeing him post on Twitter alongside us is pretty crazy. Do you have any opinions on him? I know he's wacky, but I like the zaniness. I was never a really big Varg fan. If I'm going to have like a crazy like shit poster who's a pagan, I'd prefer, Bronze Age Pervert or Zero HP Lovecraft. I feel like they do it better. I don't know. And Varg has like all this, that guy literally like burnt down a church, right? That kind of crosses a line for me. I really don't like people who actively strike the faith itself in such a brazen way. Nerve AMV Maker for $15 USA. I know it's a meme at this point, but I'm genuinely interested in your view on Shrek. I think it was really death nailed to sincerity and dramatic power in animated films. The fact that Shrek was the big hit opposed to the studio's previous film, Prince of Egypt, was a real sign of cultural rot. There was 3 original DreamWorks pictures. The first one was Prince of Egypt, the next one was Ants, and the third one was Shrek. And I always thought the Ants was kind of underlooked. It was like a Woody Allen film that was animated, although it was cynical. Shrek really kicked off this the 2000s era irreverent comedy thing, which was, that's why the Shrek video never got made, is that it was really about the 2000s generally. I actually have the portion about Shrek written and recorded already. I could literally feed you a link if you want to listen to it. From 2019. Shrek was sort of, you were right, and that's sort of the direction of my video. It was sort of the end of sincerity. It was the symbol that everybody was essentially trying to pretend like they were the smart guy that just got it, and everyone else was the idiot in the room. Whereas Prince of Egypt was genuinely, sincerely pious. And Prince of Egypt was a very flawed movie, but I think the animation was spot on. The fact that it was a musical was kind of not great, although I do love that song, See Things Through Heaven's Eyes, which perfectly captures part of the esoteric meaning of the Old Testament and in really all monotheisms, and also fuels the movie's emotion. But more than just being a not snarky movie, Prince of Egypt was genuinely, you were supposed to be participating in a piety along with the rest of the audience, whereas Shrek was just trying to kind of smirk at everything and schmuckle at everything. And after Shrek, there was this whole there was this whole series of animated Little Red Riding Hood fairy tale things, and they are all absolute schlock from top to bottom. Blah 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 blah. Hoodwinked to think that was it, right? Anyway, Cora and Barney for $5 USA. Is there anything to the JQ? What do you ask? I'm trying to get my channel taken down. Not trolling, genuinely curious. The JQ seems very persistent in some dissident right circles. Since much of postmodern thought appears to come from the secular Jews, I can somewhat see it. What is the NRX take on the JQ? I mean, isn't it pretty obvious? Everybody has group interests in Gentiles and Jews, and they'll all defend their group interests. As such, if there is an opportunity for people to advance their group interest, they'll take it. If there's free money to take, they're going to take it. What are they not going to do? Are they not going to take free money? Or it's like the conquest of the New World. I feel like blaming this on European culture is kind of stupid. I mean, Europe had been fighting against hostile invasions for hundreds of years with the Muslims. And then they come and discover a continent. And the people on that continent hadn't invented the wheel, didn't have immunity to basic diseases, had almost zero technology. They were before the Bronze Age. There were whole swaths of land that just hadn't been claimed. What were they going to do? Not take it? Right now, our civilization is dying. It's just throwing out power for the taking. What is an ambitious group that cares about itself going to do? Not take it? I find people accumulating power for their own group to be the most forgivable of all things. Posing as the other group and then subverting it is absolutely a shitty thing to do to people. I think the instances of that are very limited. But one thing I will say that pisses me off about Gentile-Jewish relations is that I think the Jewish community in particular has absolutely, positively zero self-awareness of what it says. My Jewish friends on social media routinely say things that directly insult me and my religion and my heritage as somebody who's a Gentile. And the real kicker is I don't think that they're aware that they're doing it. I think that this kind of chauvinism is par for the course when they talk amongst themselves. And the fact that you can't criticize this group in public and in any context means that they never get any pushback for the bullshit that they tell themselves. So they're totally unaware of it. They're totally unaware that they're blithely insulting people. And that's a disadvantage. I don't know what to tell you, Corbin, Barney. NRX is about political realism. Politics is about groups. Groups pursue their own interests. Both Gentiles and Jews pursue their own interests. Somewhere in our period of cultural degeneration, we stopped caring about the next generation, largely because we stopped believing in God. And now there's a whole bunch of power that's up for grabs, and someone's going to grab it, and someone's might have it. Some of the groups who grab it might have a J in front of their names. It's pretty much that simple. Dreadnought for $5 USA. As a blue-collar contractor, this obsession with social media is a bit hard to understand. Twitter is something I read in the bathroom. The rest of the day, I'm talking to people or working. Video games are for when I'm tired at the end of the day. Well, yeah, but here's the thing. As a computer programmer, there's all these little periods, like when the code is compiling, or whether you're running a Kubernetes pipeline, or, like a Terraform pipeline, and the thing's just like running and you're waiting for results. In those little 5 to 10 minute moments of downtime, it's really hard not to bust out your phone and check it. And it's really bad for you, and I'm really guilty of it. I need to find some barrier for myself doing that. I'm thinking of maybe like locking my phone in my, in my desk drawer and never looking at it. So yeah, if you're a blue collar person who's like, when I go to meetings with clients and I'm talking to them, I'm never tempted by my phone because I'm talking to people. Like I'm not tempted right now to pick up my phone and start checking Twitter. I mean, you probably can tell that I'm not checking Twitter right now. I couldn't talk this fast if I were doing that. Sam153, thanks for all you do, Dave. Cheers. Well, thank you, Sam. I think you're the Sam I know from basket weaving. If not, my apologies, but I hope to be seeing you at one of the game nights that I'm organizing. Originally, I was going to try to organize a weave around learning the rules to Warhammer 40k 10th edition. But there's another person who super chatted me and wanted like a digital game of Warhammer 40k. But like I appreciate the guy and I thank him for his super chat, but like the whole point I play Warhammer is to not be sitting at my computer. And even then, I don't play Warhammer because I have absolutely positively zero time to play it. The only time I can even justify doing something like that is if I co-schedule it with a basket weaving event. But for my own nerdy selfishness, I was thinking that we could have a basket weave where we sat down and tried to learn the rules of Warhammer 40k 10th edition, which are going to be egregiously complex, but it would be a fun exercise. And more to the point, I could finally send Sargon the pictures I've been promising for him for over, 2 years now of the orc army. And I also have a army of heretics that I could put up against the orcs that are very partially painted. I did all of the painting between this very particular period in 2020, late 2020, and late 2021, when I was burnt out on politics. Since then, I've been 100% back at politics and trying to produce content and doing live streams and doing basket weaving, and and doing conferences, and that's really been my focus. So, but it's fun to do these things. Dreadnought for $5. I love the Alien franchise, and it strikes me as a horror theme for the technologically inclined. We have AI androids, tech, and corporate overlords, but here is something organic that cannot be subverted, reasoned with, only thoughts. Yeah, that actually really is the message of the Alien franchise, and one of the reasons why I actually like Prometheus. Prometheus is an incredibly stupid movie. It's confused, it's hard to follow, the characters act like idiots, it's like the stupidest horror movie logic you can imagine, but the archetypical symbolism in Prometheus, which is an Aliens prequel, is amazing, and that is that aliens are some kind of primordial chaotic essence that embodies life before it's formed by the creator spirit. That's what builds them. They're just like pure chaotic life essence. And they smash through technology because that's what they're designed to do. And they hijack existing life because that's what they're designed to do. And yet they have no concept of holiness. They are the son that devours the mother. And this is ironic because in the symbolism of Prometheus, the symbol of Saturn is not Prometheus himself. Prometheus is the person who gives up his life for the sun. Also, the symbolism is of Baal or Saturn being the father who eats the children. And in Prometheus, the originators of humanity are preparing an apocalypse for humanity. They've designed humanity to feed off it, to attain eternal life. And the company is trying to attain eternal life by cannibalizing its own children, which are the human crew and also the androids they create. And what's the revenge of the father that devours the child? It's the child that devours the father, which is the xenomorph, which is the alien. I mean, I absolutely think that symbolic message is an alien, and that's what gives it its symbolic power. Ridley Scott apparently forgot how to tell a story. I hope he can do a better job with Napoleon. We'll see. Thank you very much for the super chat, though. Kevin Pulliam, $5 USA. I watched The Hunger Games recently, and wow, it's scarier to watch now. My fiance even turned to me during it and asked if the libs were going to do this to us. So 2 questions. How far are they really willing to go, and how far do we talk to our women about this? Well, just don't. If there's one thing I've learned with this AI stuff, just don't bring, unless they're really interested in it, don't bring women into conversations about your darkest fear about where technology could go. You really want to be the stable force in the relationship. You want to project optimism. Second of all the nightmare scenarios we have going forward with technology and virtual reality and the horrificness of clown world generally, Hunger Games seems pretty far off because the libs are so weak. They're so weak. They're there to be complacent. They're there to be entertained. Once shit starts getting real, there's no way. I mean, they might nuke us, but they're not going to do something that's so involved as like Hunger Games or anything that involves cruel Balkan shit. They don't have the stomach for it. And to the extent that it gets into an organic fight, I don't know. I'm not saying that we're going to win, but I can't imagine progressives actually surviving that kind of ordeal. Something else has to fill in this gap that is more vivacious, that's more vital. Nerve AMV Maker for $5. Peter Turchin roots elite overproduction in economic conditions that shrink the middle class. With no middle class, it costs more to be a non-elite than it did when you could be middle class. This causes intense competition for scarce elite positions. And yeah, that's actually what did happen, right? Is that a lot of people that should have been lower middle class in the baby generations were upgraded to upper middle class into elite positions. And they did that by essentially immigration, which in turn made it harder to afford houses, which in turn decreased the price of labor, which made it harder to be middle class on a middle class income, which subsequently shrank the center and made it so that their children either were going to be elite class or were going to sink straight to the bottom. There was something that someone said on Twitter that was very well said. He said that there is this incredible millennial dichotomy. You either make it and you're a highly professional person that is some director or vice president or whatever, or you're just a neat, a drug user, somebody who's completely tapped out of society. And for millennials, it appears that there's just no middle ground in any of this. And that's what happens when elite overproduction occurs. Okay, Urdoville. This is the last one, I think. It is. I don't even have my... I accidentally... Okay, I guess I do not have my Psalm reader. I need to get that prepared. I think I brought it downstairs. Let's do Psalm 24 or 34. Okay, but this is the last super chat of the night, and that's good because I'm at midnight now and I'm way over time. EuroDV for $15 USA. The last pagan god to lose their cult was Hestia of the Hearth, only being banned in 1391. She is also one of the most important deities despite having few myths dedicated to her. As epochs change, I wonder what will be the last cult of our civic religion to survive before being snuffed out. I think you're factually wrong about this, EuroDivya, because I know for a fact, being a huge fan of medieval literature, and I need to check the date on this, but also medieval art and medieval song, that the last Roman deity to be worshipped was Fortuna, the goddess of fortune. I know this from Boethius, who is a 6th century author. I know this from numerous French tapestries which depict Fortuna and the Wheel of Fortune. I know this from Carmina Burana. I know, was this an official cult? No, these people were all Christian. They weren't even syncretics. But I don't know. I see medieval culture, and I see what only could be described as a cult of Fortuna. That being said, I see why Hestia is the last person to lose their cult, because the gods are only a deity is centrally organized around a pivot of worship. Either a book in the Abrahamic traditions, or a sacrament, also in different Abrahamic religions, or a temple. And the temples all had been converted. But everybody has a temple inside their own home, which is the hearth. The last cult of our own civic religion. Our own civic religion. We'll see our own civic religion has already destroyed Hestia. I'd say Hestia will be the first god to come back. Not necessarily Hestia herself, but the religions that are practiced in the hearth. I was talking about Protestant envy from Black Horse previously at the beginning of this stream. The cults that will return first in this age will be the worship that occurs in the hearths, will be the house churches, will be perhaps the worship of basket weaving. The god of poetry and the god of community must emerge from the places that we call home and the moments that we share with each other. And for that reason, I think that will be the first god to come back. Or, when I say god, I don't believe in gods. I'm using euphemistically for mode of religious worship. And I think we already saw that in the ages of COVID. The religious practice that maintained was the religious practice of the hearth. And I'm really glad that my wife has resumed saying the daily rosary, even though I haven't been able to join her. I'm missing it tonight. But this is something that we go on and off the daily rosary plan, and I'm really glad that we have resumed that. And anyway, Dreadnought says $3. Dave, God bless you. And with that, I'm going to read Psalm 34 that I selected randomly because I forgot my physical book. Psalm 34. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will glory in the Lord. Let him afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. The poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of our Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you, his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, my children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to blot out their name from the earth. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all of their troubles. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The righteous person may have troubles, but the Lord delivers him from all. He protects his bones. Not one of them will be broken. Evil will slay the wicked. The foes of the righteous will be condemned. The Lord will rescue his servants. No one will take refuge in him. No one who takes refuge in him will be condemned. Well, guys, that's the end of the live stream. Have a wonderful rest of the evening. I'm not exactly so sure what my schedule will be. I'm going to try to get another video out Sunday. But if nothing else, I'll probably see you for another live stream, probably Thursday of next week. Have a very blessed week.